Let it be known that the biggest things that I love about this game, and what would definitely make me come back to it, is the approach to the story. When I first heard that Echoes was going to feature full voice acting, I was very skeptical for a few reasons. One, Fire Emblem's only really just had 1 or 2 lines voiced, not really full voice acting before, so I was worried about the quality of it. 2, I was like, the original barely had much dialogue to begin with. What is the point of making it fully voiced? Did they do that because there's so little dialogue that they wouldn't have to pay much for voice acting? Once I got to the game itself, all of those fears were gone. Firstly, the voice acting. Holy crap, the voice acting. This has got to be some of the best voice acting I have ever heard in any game. I've never heard voice actors nail emotion the way the ones in this game did. Never have I heard crying in a game that legitimately sounded like crying. Someone going mad with rage that actually sounded realistic. And of course, the voice actors also nailed the timing of any comedic lines. So according to the credits, Wendy Lee, who you may have heard on this channel as the voice of Athena Sykes in Ace Attorney, did the voice direction for this game. She deserves major props for that, seriously, because the voice direction in this game was pretty amazing overall. I always felt like Fates didn't nearly have as good voice direction as Awakening did, but this one just blows both of them out of the water. So, good job Wendy Lee for that. The particular standouts to me are Alm, Grey, and Claire on Alm's route, Saber, and especially May on Celica's route. Seriously, May deserves some attention in her own right. May's voice acting is absolutely amazing. She became one of my favorite characters just for that alone. And that's really saying something, considering that May was a character in the original who I was just like, huh? Who's May? Why does she even exist? And it made it even better the fact that I was playing Persona 5 at the same time, where her voice actress also plays Makoto in that game, who's actually very, very different. Now, I liked Makoto's voice, but I felt that she was very stoic most of the time, so didn't really get a chance to show that big of a range of emotion. And then May happened, and I was like, wow. Seriously, wow. This is probably the closest I've come to praising a voice-acted character in a game as much as I did Junpei in Persona 3. So seriously, that was incredible. But I think I summed it up before. The Gaiden cast were, to me, and probably to many other people in the FE fandom, some of the most boring, least memorable characters in the entire series. Apart from Alm and Celica, and maybe I guess Sonya, most people just did not care about the majority of characters in Gaiden. In fact, when I was doing my Who I Wanna Be in Fire Emblem Warriors video, I had a lot of difficulty even deciding who I'd pick to be in the game, because the characters were just that unmemorable to me. Now, I'm like, okay, seriously, you could give us anyone from Gaiden and I'd be happy. It really goes to show that the voice acting just helped bring these characters to life so much, and the fact that even Level Up quotes a voice now. Believe me, I miss that so much when I go back and play earlier games. When I'm playing Sacred Stones, I miss my characters commenting on level ups. And then there's the fact that death quotes are voiced too. I'm glad they didn't fall into the trap that a lot of the recent games have done, and made like half the cast just retreat when they die for plot reasons. In this one, death is a real threat again from a plot standpoint. And, well, there's a game that's quite similar to Fire Emblem called Valkyria Chronicles. That game had death quotes fully voice acted. When I first played that, I was like, oh god, I really hope they don't do this in Fire Emblem eventually. And they did, and it was just as heart-wrenching as I expected it to be. Even worse is that other characters will mourn on the results screen, depending on if they were close to the person who died. And some of those, the voice acting there is just heart-wrenching. Unfortunately though, I feel like this is an oversight, but the mourning lines still play if you're on casual, which is very, very silly and kills the mood dramatically. It's like you hear some of the more heart-wrenching lines and it's like the other characters going, I'm standing right here! I suppose now's a good time to talk about characters themselves. Now, obviously I'm not going to get into everyone here, but I'm just going to list off a few of my favourites. So, firstly, Alm. I quite like Alm as a character a lot. I didn't expect to, but I really did. In a lot of ways, he feels very similar to Path of Radiance Ike to me. Starting out as just a common villager unsure of himself, and growing through his journey into a hero capable of giving rousing speeches to entire armies. Of course, Alm's journey ends quite differently to the way Ike's did. Ike is still the one main character in the series who has no royal blood whatsoever, but you still got a great sense of progress with Alm's journey. And there was also a lot of conflict in it too, whether his methods were really right or not. Of course, he does really get put through the ringer later on in the game. Stuff that I knew was coming because I already knew the plot of the original, but the remake just makes it so much worse by expanding on it all. And adding in some tragedy with Celica that was not present in the original at all. I did like the way Alm and Celica's relationship played out to me personally. It was interesting the way that they weren't afraid to show the conflict between the two characters as things go on. It's often a trap in a lot of stories, and many Fire Emblem games are guilty of it too, in that the main couple just never has any turmoil at all. They're just always perfectly happy all the time. The worst that happens is that maybe one of them gets kidnapped a couple of times. But here, the two of them actually fight, and it just helped make the relationship feel a bit more real to me. And the way they expanded on their two goals, helping contrast Mila and Duma's ideals, and showed that while Alm taking the path of the sword, it was kind of interesting. With him, it was doing that, but trying not to be corrupted by that. Celica went with the path that seems the one that's less likely to make you corrupted, the path of kindness, but hers really delved into how being too kind can have its issues. But I also felt that Celica didn't stray into unintentionally unsympathetic territory. Some members of the fandom disagree, but to me, I still sympathise with her the whole way through. Or at least I only didn't sympathise with her at the points where the plot wants you not to. Next is Grey. Well, Grey and Tobian mainly, but Grey is the one you kind of see more of. Wow. They took a character who had literally 2 lines in the original game, and turned him into just such a cool best friend character, who made a lot of great comments on other parts of the game, and acted as a really interesting down-to-earth voice to a lot of other parts. Plus, his banter with Tobian was pretty great. While I didn't personally find Cliff and Tobian as interesting, I really wish the two of them got more supports. Really, they deserved it. I think the only support they have is with each other, which is a shame. It kind of blocks off their development a little bit. But I did like that they gave Cliff and Tobian actual motivation for joining the army, because in the original game, the two of them were just like, oh, Alm's going? Guess I'm going too! Da-da-da-da! They joined the party. And that's all you ever hear from them all game. But those two weren't real standouts to me. You know who was a standout? Claire. So in some ways, Claire is very similar to the typical high-class lady character you see in the series. She's very much like Sarah or Maribel or LaRachel in a way, but I still really liked her. She had a lot of great moments throughout the game. Her interactions with other characters were really nice. It helped that she got a lot of supports, though I wish she got a support with her brother. That's kind of weird that she didn't. She had a lot of memorable lines in battle as well. It helped that she's a pretty useful Pegasus Knight throughout the game. She also has an unrequited crush that's handled pretty respectfully and doesn't overtake her character. Her supports with Alm, there's no bad blood on both sides really, and like I said, her entire character does not revolve around that. In fact, I'd say it's only about 10% of her character. Her supports with Grey are also pretty great too, questioning how genuine Grey's feelings for her are before finally realizing, wait, he actually was serious. There's a reason why I'm bringing up how this is handled now, and you can probably tell why. But anyway, I really like Claire. She's probably one of my favourite Pegasus Knights in the series now. As far as other characters in Alm's party go, Clive is alright. I don't hate Clive. Like, some people find Clive really boring. I don't, but admittedly, him being voiced by Shinjiro probably earns some points for me. I thought that he had some decent scenes throughout the game. He acted as kind of like a supporting leader type character, and was the one to, just as Grey was the one the plot went to for more of a commoner's viewpoint, he was the one that they went to for a more military viewpoint on certain situations, and I like that. I guess Zeke and Tatiana were also kind of interesting, but the main parts of Zeke's character come from the fact that he's blatantly a certain someone from Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem, so really his plot is not really contained in this one game. I thought his voice acting was pretty good though. On Celica's side, I've already mentioned how May is amazing, so let's skip her. Saber was also fairly decent. He's kind of like the Clive of Celica's party, in that he gives kind of more of a military-style voice of reason at certain points in the plot. I found him pretty decent overall. As much as Leon isn't really my kind of character, I do appreciate that gay fans have better representation than Niles and Rajat in Fates. That's all I'll say about that. There's also the White Wing sisters. Like Zeke, we have seen them before, so they've had characterization outside of this game, but it was nice to hear them finally voice acted. I do quite like the voices for all of them, except Katria. The weird thing is, Katria is the one character in the game that's voice I wasn't really a big fan of. I don't know, I just think she sounds a bit too emotionless most of the time. Anyway, it's really nice to see the three siblings finally getting to support each other, and their support conversations were a nice mix of humour and heartwarming sibling interactions. There's a few of them between Pala and S though that get a little bit awkward if you know certain things that are going on there. Hint, Pala's death quote. Hint, Est's ending in Shadow Dragon. They conflict. Okay, actually, random side note, is it just me, or does Echoes have the most amount of characters in Unrequited Love of any game in the series? It almost feels like they were trying to set some kind of record for that. But, anyway, moving on. There's also Celica's new spoilery character. If you're in this video, you probably don't care about spoilers, so I guess I can just mention who they are, even though it's stupidly obvious. I mean, they've got the same hair color as Celica. They love protecting Celica. Who could they possibly be? And Celica mentioned that she had a brother who totally died in a fire in the past, so obviously that's not going to be a Chekhov's gun. Yeah, his identity was pretty painfully obvious, but in a lot of ways, I do quite like Conrad. His supports with Celica were pretty great. Their relationship felt very natural. And just the way he goes from acting all cool with the mask on to being the dorky brother with it off, I don't know if I saw a bit of kinship there because I kind of am a dorky older brother to a younger sister in real life. One other thing that I do like quite a lot about him, and it's not apparent until the final battle, it's vaguely implied that Conrad was raised as a Duma worshipper, given that he was raised by Halcyon, who's the one heroic Duma worshipper you see in the game. I thought that added an interesting bit of variety to the cast, and I did really like his final battle quotes. While everyone else in Celica's party was probably raised in Mila's faith, so they're all like, "Die, you evil god, die," he's much more respectful towards Duma, and says that he wants to give Duma the dignified death that he deserves. I thought that was interesting in adding a bit of moral ambiguity to the whole thing, and adding some heroic playable membership of the Duma faithful, considering that Hark unfortunately isn't playable. I used his original name, Halcyon. But yeah, seriously, Halcyon should have joined. He really should have. He would have been the perfect Goto archetype character, but sadly no, he is just an NPC. So that's the hits when it comes to characters. Now let me say a few misses. There aren't that many that I have, but there are a few. I already mentioned how Tobin and Cliff kind of don't have that many support options, which is a real shame. It's also annoying that if you go back and re-recruit them as Celica, they have no supports at all on that route, so yeah, get used to not seeing any development from them whatsoever. Speaking of Celica's route and supports though, Jenny. Jenny is a character who I don't think they're a bad character, but I feel they're a wasted opportunity. Her only support is with Sonya, a character who doesn't necessarily have to join the party. So, if you don't get Sonya, you've just said goodbye to Jenny's only support, and thus, she barely has any dialogue throughout the whole game. Which is a shame because I do kinda like what little we do know about Jenny. And the remake expands on her backstory quite a bit and gives her a bit of an interesting relationship with Sonya as well. Speaking of Sonya, this is a bit weird. I know a lot of people really like her. I felt she was a little bit generic as a character. I felt that her personality was very Camilla-ish. She was very good in her supports with Jenny, but other than that, She just seemed like a generic seductress type character to me for the most part, although she does have the excellent story relevance of, well, that plot thing that she's relevant to. Yeah, I wish I could have got her to kill Jeddah personally, but she wasn't promoted on my file by then. Then there's Jessie. Jessie's alright, but it feels a bit weird they basically went full Inigo with him and made him a total flirt. I know that's kind of a thing in the series, but to me it feels like he's the one character who, rather than getting rounded out, actually got more devolved into a single trait. He said that S was cute in the original game, that was the only indication that he was a kind of flirt, but the remake made that his almost entire personality. The other missed opportunity here is that it's possible to go and talk to Silk as Celica, but she won't join the party. And there's a pretty interesting interaction between Silk and Jessie in a memory prism, so it's a shame those two can't support. As far as characters go, there is really only one character that I thought was genuinely bad, and not just a missed opportunity. And I think you can probably tell who this character is. This is an opinion shared by a lot of people in the fandom. And yep, it's time to talk about Faye. The thing that I don't like about Faye is that her entire character revolves around being hopelessly in love with Arl. Really, the only time she shows any kind of thing vaguely resembling a personality outside of that is her A support with Silk. But to me, it was ruined by the fact that their C support, Silk basically goes up to her and outright says, "Hello, I'm a girl, you're a girl. I'm giving you an opportunity to have character development outside of Alm. Would you like to accept?" Faye, "No, I only love Alm, that's my only defining character trait, go away." She literally refuses an opportunity to have friends outside of Alm. That just really ruined her to me. See, even Cordelia was better at having personality beyond her crush, and that's really saying something. The main reason why I don't like this is that the original already had Claire, who already had an unrequited crush on Alm, and Claire was a much more rounded character, so there really wasn't much point to having an extra one in there. I get that Alm's party consisted entirely of dudes originally. I like that there's more diversity in his starting team, but I don't like that the one girl is that. And even in Faye's base conversations, she mentions how her own parents are sick of how her letters consist entirely of her writing about Alm. It's like the game knows Faye has this problem, but refuses to do anything about it. So, while we're on the subject of characters, I think it's time to move on to the villains now. Let's just discuss the main new addition here, Berkut. Berkut, I don't personally agree with a lot of fans saying that he is one of the, quote, deepest and most complex villains in the series' history. I don't think that's true in the slightest. I just think he looks that way because the villains we've had in recent games have been really terrible. But I do think he's not a bad villain. He actually has motivation, while still being hateable, and Ian Sinclair's voice acting is just really great. He just nails it when Berkut starts going completely out of his mind. He's also a fairly challenging boss in almost all of his encounters, although one time that I played this, Delthea kinda crit him with Aura, and that was pretty funny. But other than that, he was fairly challenging. I really like his final battle as well. It's a small map with not that many enemies on it, but, it really felt like one of the better, small, single enemy boss fight maps in Fire Emblem. There aren't many of those, and they tend to be either pure luck-based, like Path of Radiance's Black Knight one, or so pathetic they can be beaten in one turn, like Fate's Birthright's Leo one. So this one was neither of them, so it was pretty refreshing that way. I will say though, I'm not sure he really deserved a sympathetic send-off scene. I kinda felt like he wasn't likable enough for that to me. I mean, yeah, it's sad what happened to him, but this is a guy who willingly sacrificed his own girlfriend for power, and who, when Alm comes and says, "Hey, you're my cousin, I have family now, let's be friends," is like, no. So he kinda had his chance, and I do feel like it's a bit weird how the game expects you to find him a tragic character in the end. As some fans have said, he really brought most of his misery on himself. As even his own fiancée points out, if he hadn't cared so much about getting the throne, he could have been happy. Then there's Fernand, another villain added to the remake, and basically the second in Berkut's dastardly duo. He's kind of interesting. He does seem like a pretty stereotypical, I'm a snobby noble and I hate all commoners type of guy at first, but he does have reasons for acting like that, and at least he admits that he was wrong in the end. Now, I've heard that he gets more development in the Rise of the Deliverance DLC. I haven't played that yet, but I intend to, so I'll reserve judgments of his character until I've done that. Then there is Rudolph. Rudolph is interesting. The original Rudolph did get a lot of flack sometimes from the fandom, because while he did have good intentions, a lot of people think that it really wasn't that necessary for him to start a war which results in a lot of casualties just to have his own son kill him and be a hero. The remake actually does expand on his motives a little bit more. Like, I like they point out that he realized that the gods were dying when no one else did, and that's partly what drove him to being so drastic so quickly. But what I also like is the fact that the remake explains how he had no choice but to abandon Ulm, because the original didn't do a very good job of that. I still feel like he's a bit of a weird character in that he's supposed to be sympathetic, but he did kinda cause the deaths of lots of people by starting that war. You think that as Emperor he could have just tried to improve the world through other means? But he was alright, and definitely a much better version of the, big king armored guy villain than we've seen in a lot of recent games. Which is ironic because he was the first of that archetype in the series. I also honestly never expected them to keep the fact that he won't attack Ulm in his chapter, but having a look at his actual stats, I'm glad they did. Very glad. Then there's Jeddah. With Jeddah, they took pretty much one of the original, obviously evil Dark Bishop characters in the series, and made him still pretty stereotypically evil, but at least have a little bit of depth to him, in that he does genuinely believe that Duma's philosophy is the best for the world. Though in the end, it does make him come across as kinda pathetic, which a lot of the party does point out. He pretty much feels like a guy who's in denial over their 120-year-old grandparent dying of old age. It's like, dude, it's going to happen and there's nothing you can really do about it. So you should probably just accept it. Speaking of which, there's Duma himself. I'm kind of conflicted on how they portray Duma in this game. Not the fact that he's a divine dragon, because that was already kind of implied in the original game, or at least the dragon part, but more the fact that, I don't know if this is the case for any of you, but to me, Duma came across as a bit more obviously evil than he did in the original game. I feel like he lost a lot of his moral ambiguity and became more of just, oh, yet another dragon whose issues are all explained by dragon madness. In the original, there wasn't much dialogue, but it was at least implied that Duma partially orchestrated the events of the game. He himself had known how far his followers were going, and he wanted to put a stop to that, and he perfectly accepts Ulm defeating him as a way to usher in a new era. In the original, I never felt like Duma was really that evil. The real villain was Jeddah, taking his philosophies too far. In the remake, it feels like Duma's a lot more at fault for what's going on, and Duma comes across as more obviously evil and monstrous, which is kind of a shame. Admittedly, the remake makes Mila look just as bad in some cases, especially that cutscene with her and Rudolph. I did like that one. And I also liked Mila's comments towards the end of the game, where the main reason she sealed the falchion away is that she didn't want to see her brother die, which actually makes it quite sad. But in general, I don't know if you felt any of this, but I just felt like, if anything, Duma came across as more flatly evil in the remake than he did in the original, and that's kinda sad, because I liked Duma in the original simply because he was a unique twist on the series' dark god, in that he actually wasn't that dark when you think about it. In talking about those characters, I've probably said all I can about the game's story. I really love all the little improvements they made and the additions they did, except for one. I'll talk about this one plot point that I didn't like now. This one point in the story that really bugged me, and that was what happens after you defeat Berkut the second time. So he's all like, oh no, I'm losing, I better use this totally not evil mirror that the totally not evil sorceress gave me, even though I know that it's evil, but I'm gonna use it anyway. And then, oh no, a bunch of evil zombie hands are devouring everyone, friend and foe alike, whatever shall we do? Oh, my Deus Ex Machina Celica pendant is glowing. Bing! Problem solved, the end. We're never gonna mention that plot point ever again. We were never in any real danger, yay! Yeah. I honestly felt like, what was the point of that scene? Other than showing how far Berkut has gone, and really, you didn't need that. He was already losing it at that point anyway. Showing how evil Nui Baba was, you didn't need that either. You didn't need much of an indication there. It's just something that always bugs me with plots. One thing that I really hate is whenever they introduce a new danger that only exists for a moment, never really does anything meaningful, and is instantly Deus Ex Machina'd away and is never mentioned again. This is part of why I really didn't like Chapter 25 of Birthright and Fates, because they're like, oh hey, turns out Takumi was being possessed the whole time. Except that you unpossess him before it even becomes a threat, so really there was no point to that scene at all. That's what I feel here. This scene is really doesn't really have much of a point to it other than just being creepy. That was really the only scene to me that felt very superfluous or unnecessary. The rest of the plot, I thought, both stuff that was in the original and stuff that was added, I did think was quite well done. They added in a nobles versus commoners subplot, but it did work with the way the overall story was laid out. It's definitely not the best plot in the series, but the way it's presented, with the voice acting, the dialogue, the portraits, everything about it, it just makes it feel a lot better than the bare bones plot it actually is. And to be honest, that's really the best that I expect out of Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem is not known for having particularly complex or deep storylines, but what it does is it tells those storylines very well, and it does it in a way that even though the plot is fairly basic, you don't mind because the characters are just so good and they carry it so well. So I really hope this kind of storytelling becomes the standard for the series going forth. Like I said, if they combine this with Conquest gameplay, you'd have a pretty much perfect game on your hands. And that's what I hope the Fire Emblem Switch will be. Of course, that's probably not going to be the case, but I can dream. One complaint that I do have about the story, the ending to me was a bit weak. The final blow on Duma was great, Duma's parting words were great, but after that, you just get Alm and Celica talking to each other, and then a voiceover that was bizarrely not all that hopeful. It was basically saying that war will come again because evil lurks in the hearts of men. Like, I get that's true, but for an ending after you've fought so hard to achieve peace, I was wondering if there was going to be a layer of hope after it, like, but for now, Valentia is going to enjoy peace for several generations to come. But no, it ended on a surprisingly bleak note, and that felt a bit odd to me and kinda just killed the mood in a way. One other thing that I kinda wish happened, although this is probably more wishful thinking on my part, but Alm and Celica's ending says they got married and became king and queen of the One Kingdom of Valentia. I kinda wish that the actual ending had them confessing their love to each other. In the original, they did that just before the final battle, but in the remake, they never really did. I get that it's already pretty much implied, but I do feel like at the very least they could have said it right at the end? I don't know, that's just me. And again, I'd probably have less issue with it if it weren't for the fact that in the original game they spelled it out a bit more clearly just before the final battle. I love the soundtrack of this game. It might be my new favourite soundtrack in the whole series. Gaiden already had some surprisingly good music for a GBA game, but this one, they just did such a great job with the remixes. The final battle especially. Those who know me will know that I've been waiting to hear that song orchestrated for a very long time, and they did not disappoint at all. As well as improving on the already good songs, they made the few songs that were pretty weak in the original actually memorable, especially the recruitment theme. Originally, that was by far my least favourite recruitment theme in the series. If you haven't listened to the original Gaiden recruitment theme, do it. It sounds really, well, one, it's pretty high-pitched and screechy, but it also sounds more sad than triumphant. The one in Echoes, not only did they fix it to make it actually sound like a recruitment theme now, but it does feel like they're going back to the more dramatic recruitment themes of old. I'm really not a fan of Awakening and Fate's recruitment themes, it's hard to describe exactly what they did, but they basically made them much less fast-paced and dramatic, and turned them into much softer, more ambient music, and I really didn't feel that fit the tone of a recruitment theme, personally. This one is still kinda similar. It's not quite on the same level of things like Together We Ride, but I do like it a lot better than the original recruitment theme. As far as other songs that were pretty forgettable originally that I think are pretty great now, all of the battle themes, the boss theme, the themes for Doomer's Tower and Doomer's Altar, because both of them were basically just bleep bloop bleep bloop in the original, and actually giving Rudolph his own proper map and battle theme as opposed to him just using a standard one. Oh yeah, and the new songs are pretty great too, especially Berkut's battle theme. I really love that. The overall recurring riff of the game is, I guess it's alright. I don't know, I just generally don't pay as much attention to it when the original songs were already good enough to begin with. There are a few songs though that I'm not as big a fan of in the soundtrack. Mainly the Act 3 nap themes for both Alm and Celica. They're both barely any different from the Act 1 themes, well, Act 2 in Celica's case, but anyway. Celica's Act 3 theme does have a pretty good part that it gets into right at the end before it loops, but other than that, it feels very similar. They did remix Alm and Celica's second nap themes from the original, but they're restricted to the amiibo dungeons, which is kind of weird. I really wish they would have used those during Act 3, because in particular, Alm's second map theme, it got a great remix as an unused song in Radiant Dawn, and that was pretty amazing. I'm kind of sad there was nothing really resembling it, though Alm's Act 4 map theme is absolutely fantastic, as is Celica's. The one other song on the soundtrack that I'm not a fan of, the promotion theme. It is by far, to me, the most bland, boring promotion theme in the entire series. I get that you're promoting a lot more often in this game than you usually are, and that promotion serves a very different role here, but, come on, it doesn't justify them making the song so boring. I guess one final thing that I should talk about here, the localization. When I first heard that 8.4 was doing the localization, I was actually kind of worried. This is the same company that localized Awakening, i.e. the company responsible for turning Chrom and Sumia's S support into pies, and turning Wildheart into an abusive father, for no apparent reason. Seriously, as much as Fate's localization caused a huge explosion, I thought its localization was fine. I honestly found worse problems with Awakening's. Plus, Fate's was badly written even in Japanese anyway, so it's not like they had much to improve on. This game, though, I was really surprised. 8.4 did a phenomenal job here. All the dialogue felt very, very natural, the script was very well written, and the voice actors really sold it. And it didn't feel quite like Awakening, where they often just shoved in random humour for humour's sake when there wasn't any in the Japanese version. I mean, there is a little bit of that. I'm guessing a lot of the manure jokes weren't there in the original. And apparently, Delphia never had a crush on Clive in the original Japanese version. If that is true, that seems a very weird thing for the localization to add, in all honesty. But to me, this really brought back the feel of the old great Fire Emblem localizations. In fact, even 8.4's earlier work with Shadow Dragon. Not straying from the original too much. You get lines that are basically the same as the original, but they're just embellished to the point where they're actually interesting to read, rather than just a purely literal translation. There were lines in this game's plot that I was like, oh, I recognize that line from the fan translation. This doesn't mean they stole from the fan translation at all, it means that obviously the line is a pretty direct translation of the Japanese, which is pretty good. But it's localized in a way that actually sounds natural. Again, I'm not one for literally translating everything that results in a script that sounds utterly stupid, seriously. For an example, go to Serene's Forest, look up the original Mystery of the Emblem translation patch, and compare that to Shadow Dragon's localized script. The lines are saying pretty much the same thing, but the original fan translation is so much more boring. That's enough of that tangent though. That's really all I can say about Fire Emblem Echoes. It's definitely a game that story-wise and character-wise I loved. Gameplay-wise, it left a little to be desired. I definitely hope that they take a lot of things they learned from the storytelling in this game to heart in future games. I also hope they make archers like they were in this game for every game they do in the series from now on, because seriously, I love archers here. I wouldn't mind a bit of Gaiden's magic system being continued into the series too, it's another really fun mechanic. But I would appreciate better map design, better variety in enemies. The weapon triangle definitely needs to be back, more inventory other than just one. But all in all, it's still a pretty fun game for me to play. So, those are just my thoughts, and with that I'll end off this video, and I will see you again next time when I give my thoughts on a different game. So, see you then.